skillful use of the media. He might plant a newspaper article that would suddenly sideswipe Vanderbilt, portraying him as an evil monopolist. Vanderbilt would have to respond, but that would only publicize the charge. And meanwhile, Gould's name would be nowhere in evidence. The media in this instance are perfect as both the smokescreen concealing guerrilla tactics and the vehicle conveying them. Use the media to goad your enemies, getting them to disperse their energies in defending themselves while you watch or find a new target to raid and ambush. Lacking a real battle to deal with, their frustration will mount and lead them to costly mistakes. In conventional warfare, the way you supply your army is a critical issue. In guerrilla warfare, on the other hand, you live off your enemies as much as possible, using their resources, their energy, and their power as a kind of supply base. Mao supplied his army mostly with captured equipment and food. Gould actually started out by infiltrating Vanderbilt's inner circle as a financial partner, then using Vanderbilt's immense resources to fund his mayhem. Using the enemy's materiel will help you to endure the longer length of any successful guerrilla campaign. In any event, you must plan to live cheaply, marshaling what you have for the long run. In most conflicts, time is a danger, bringing Murphy's Law into play. If anything can go wrong, it will. If your army is small and relatively self-sufficient, though, there is less to go wrong. And meanwhile, you are working to make sure that for the enemy, the passage of time is a nightmare. Morale is sinking, resources are stretched, and even great planners like Napoleon are finding themselves with problems they could never have foreseen. The effect is exponential. As unexpected problems crop up, the enemy starts making mistakes, which lead to more problems. And so it goes. Make time an offensive weapon in your strategizing. Design your maneuvers to keep your enemies just barely going, always thinking that one more battle will do the trick. You want them to deteriorate slowly. A sudden sharp setback, a clear view of the trap you are laying for them, and they will pull out before the damage is done. Let them take key positions that give them the illusion of success. They will hold on to them tenaciously as your raids and pinprick attacks grow in number. Then, as they weaken, increase the pace of these attacks. Let them hope, let them think it is all still worth it, until the trap is set. Then, break their illusion. Just as you are extending time, contrary to convention, you are also extending space. You want to bring the fight to areas outside the theater of war, to include public and international opinion, turning the war into a political and global issue, and giving the enemy too large a space to defend. Political support is invaluable to an underdog guerrilla campaign. The longer the fight is drawn out, the more the enemy seems morally unjustified and politically isolated. Always try to ally your guerrilla campaign with a cause you can defend as just and worthy. You will win your guerrilla war in one of two ways. The first route is to increase the level of your attacks as your enemies deteriorate, then finish them off, as the Russians finished off Napoleon. The other method is by turning sheer exhaustion to your advantage. You just let the enemy give up, for the fight is no longer worth the aggravation. The latter way is the better one. It costs you less in resources, and it looks better. The enemy has fallen on his own sword. But even a guerrilla campaign cannot go on forever. At a certain point, time starts to work against you as well. If the ending is taking too long, you must go on the offensive and finish the enemy off. In the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese drew out the war to a point where it was also costing them too much. That was why they launched the Tet Offensive in 1968, to greatly accelerate the deterioration of the U.S. war effort. The essence of guerrilla warfare is fluidity. The enemy will always try to adjust to what you are doing, attempting to find its feet in this unfamiliar terrain. You must be prepared to change and adopt whatever is contrary to expectation. This might mean occasionally fighting in a conventional manner, concentrating your army to attack here or there, then dispersing again. Your goal is maximum disorder and unfamiliarity. Remember, this war is psychological. It is more on the level of strategy than anything else that you give the enemy nothing to hold on to, nothing tangible to counter. It is the enemy's minds that are grasping at air, and their minds that fall first. Reversal. A guerrilla strategy is extremely hard to counter, which is what makes it so effective. If you find yourself in a fight with guerrillas and you use conventional methods to fight them, you play into their hands. Winning battles and taking territory means nothing in this kind of war. The only effective counter-strategy is to reverse the guerrillas' reversal, neutralizing their advantages. You must refuse them the freedom of time and space they need for their mayhem. You must work to isolate them, physically, politically, and morally. Above all, you must never respond in a graduated manner by stepping up your forces bit by bit, as the United States did in the Vietnam War. You need a quick, decisive victory over such an opponent. If this seems impossible, it is better to pull out while you can than to sink into the protracted war the guerrilla fighter is trying to lure you into. Here are further reflections on the strategy of the void. From The Campaigns of Napoleon by David G. Chandler. In addition to wasting an ever-increasing proportion of French manpower, the elusive Russian tactics also contributed to the mental as well as physical exhaustion of Napoleon's forces. Tip-and-run raids by small bands of Cossacks were continuous and exercised a baleful influence far in excess of the military danger they represented. The French army became increasingly subject to fits of the jitters. Captain Roeder noted one typical example in his diary. The Hessian troops were mustering for parade before the Emperor's quarters at Vitebsk on August 17th, when everything was suddenly thrown into ridiculous uproar because a few Cossacks had been sighted, who were said to have carried off a forager. The entire garrison sprang to arms, and when they had ridden out, it was discovered that they were really surrounded by only a few dozen Cossacks who were dodging about hither and thither. In this way, they will be able to bring the whole garrison to hospital in about 14 days without losing a single man. From On Partisans and Irregular Forces by J.F.A. Lumière de Corvée. Such was the system Spain used against us. 150 to 200 guerrilla bands scattered all over Spain had sworn to kill 30 or 40 Frenchmen a month each. That made 6,000 to 8,000 men a month for all guerrilla bands together. The order was never to attack soldiers traveling as a body unless the guerrillas outnumbered them. But they fired on all stragglers, attacked small escorts, and sought to lay hands on the enemy's funds, couriers, and especially convoys. As all the inhabitants acted as spies for their fellow citizens, the guerrillas knew when the convoys would leave and how strong their escorts would be, and the bands would make sure they were twice the size. They knew the country very well, and they would attack furiously in the most favorable spot. Success often crowned the undertaking, but they always killed a lot of men and the goal was achieved. As there are 12 months in the year, we were losing about 80,000 men a year without any pitched battles. The war in Spain lasted 7 years, so over 500,000 men were killed. But that includes only those killed by the guerrillas. Add the battles of Salamanca, Talavera, and Vitoria, and several others that our troops lost, the sieges, the fruitless attack on Cadiz. Add to the invasion and evacuation of Portugal, the fevers and various illnesses that the temperature caused our soldiers to suffer, and you will see that we could add a further 300,000 men to that number during those 7 years. From what has been said, It will be apparent that the prime aim of this sort of war is to bring about the destruction of the enemy almost without him noticing it. And as a drop of water dripping on a stone will eventually dig a hole in the stone, patience and perseverance are needed, always following the same system. In the long run, the enemy will suffer more from this than he would from losing pitched battles. Chapter 27. Seem to work for the interests of others while furthering your own. The alliance strategy.